Look at this full-page art from the first chapter. It's very nicely detailed and pretty freaky. What do you think happens next? This is what happens next. Out of every story I've consumed, Dandadan is by far the hardest one to explain, which is quite an achievement. No matter how complex a piece of work might be, you can usually explain the general concept in 1 to 3 sentences. In Attack on Titan, you've got people fighting man-eating giants. In Game of Thrones, you've got various factions vying for control over the 7 kingdoms. Even something like Pulp Fiction can be boiled down to a movie about 4 interconnected crime stories. But what about Dandadan? Anytime you look up the synopsis to Dandadan, you either get a vague description or you get a summary of the entire first chapter. Indeed, it's quite hard to give a properly encapsulating explanation of the series. When I went into the manga, I thought it would be another one of those overhyped battle shonen, but I was quite surprised to find my expectations not just blown away, but utterly turned upside down. Dandadan doesn't really have an overarching plot, and there aren't that many typical battle shonen stereotypes. Instead, what I found was something quite special, an absolutely absurd coming-of-age story filled with love, drama, and most importantly, balls. Allow me to take you on a journey of what happens when a drunk person makes a manga. Before I can explain the story of Dandadan, I gotta explain the story of how it was conceived in the first place. Basically, the mangaka said, "F it, we ball." His name is Yukinobu Tatsu, and he was previously an assistant for Fujimoto Tatsuki on Fire Punch and Chainsaw Man. Yukinobu Tatsu was also an assistant for Kakuyuji on Hell's Paradise. Funnily enough, Kakuyuji was also an assistant for Fujimoto. It makes you wonder what arcane rituals must be going on in their studio that has allowed it to create such insane mangaka. You can tell that Yukinobu and Kaku definitely took inspiration from Fujimoto's absurd action-filled worlds, but each of them have their own unique flavor. As for Yukinobu Tatsu, it actually took him quite a while to get a long-running serialization. His first work was published between 2010 and 2011 in the monthly shonen magazine, and it was called Seigi no Rokugo. There hasn't been any translation, so there's barely any information about it, but from the first volume's art, you can see that you have a boy-girl duo with the girl having that distinct Yukinobu-style hair with highly defined strands. Yukinobu's second series was Fireball, which was a baseball manga that was serialized between 2013 and 2014. Once again, there's barely any information about it, but if I had to guess, it's about a ball that gets set on fire. It wouldn't be until 2019 that Yukinobu published another manga, a one-shot called Yamada Kiki Eot. It's on Jump Plus, which is Shonen Jump's site for web manga like Kaiju No. 8 and Spy Family. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any translations of Yamada Kiki except for one that's in Chinese, but it just so happens that I have a friend who can speak it fluently. Shout out to Lawrence! So, Yamada Kiki Eot starts off with a monster attacking a city and destroying a subway. In the opening page, it says that the story is a new generation female high school student heroic rom-com. Yeah, checks out. Due to the immense threat posed by the monster against the city, the Prime Minister asks Yamada Kiki, a superhero, for help. Next, we cut to Yamada Kiki, a tomboyish student that trains hard every day with this guy. I don't know what his Japanese name is, but for his Chinese translation, my friend called him Little Gong. After training, Yamada meets up with her friends and they tease her about liking Little Gong. Yamada reveals that she does like him, but she doesn't want the relationship to become impure. On the other hand, her friends want to help set the two of them up, so they go shopping to get Yamada some cute clothes. They want to increase her feminine appeal. Yamada isn't really all for it, but her friends get her some fancy new underwear. That's when we find out Yamada has been getting a call this whole time. Little Gong bursts into the store to find her. He then scolds Yamada for shopping and ignoring the monster emergency. They get into an argument, and Little Gong says he never actually saw Yamada as a woman. Yamada is noticeably heartbroken by the statement and wants to return to her regular tomboyish self. She then arrives at the scene of the monster but leaves behind something important, which we'll get to later. Yamada becomes massive and confronts the monster, but she realizes she's flashing everybody below her. She had left her battlesuit in the store, and worse yet, she's wearing the same lewd panties from before. As you can see, the fight doesn't go so well because Yamada is so distracted. She desperately doesn't want to expose herself, not wanting Little Gong to think she's lewd. Yamada eventually gets knocked down, and we get a flashback of her getting bullied because she was huge as a child. Like actually humongous. Then Little Gong steps in to defend her, getting hurt in the process. He says that he always wanted to be a hero, but he couldn't. Instead, Yamada is his hero, and he'll always support her no matter what. When we cut back to the present, Yamada still doesn't have the confidence to uphold everyone's expectations of her. But suddenly, Little Gong strips to his underwear. Bet you didn't see that one coming. He tells her not to be shy, and he apologizes for what he said to her in the store. He says that she's really cute and that he wants to see her panties. This shit's insane. That's not all though, because even Yamada's friends strip to their underwear too. Before you know it, everybody has shed their clothes, urging Yamada to fight. And so Yamada tears off her own shirt with newfound confidence. She finally fights the monster with full force, unafraid of how she might expose herself. She punches the monster into the air, grabs it, and slams it into the ground in one of the most hype panty shots in existence. Sheesh! Afterward, Yamada goes back to training, but now she's in a relationship with Little Gang. Yamada doesn't really want to train all the time and instead wants to go on a date. Unfortunately, Little Gang is being a little bit annoying. Yamada's like, I wanna go on a date. But Little Gang's like, I can't hear you! And so the manga ends with Yamada smacking Little Gang and calling him an idiot. Whew. What a banger. As you can see, Yukinobu really likes the stripping motif for some reason. For some time, Yukinobu Tatsu works on a ton of projects, but they never got past the serialization meeting. Here are some of the insane art he's done in his sketchbook. Yeah, these things are not sketches. They look so good. It makes me wonder what Yukinobu might have cooked up if he had been able to write a manga about this insane fantasy setting. It's also interesting that Yukinobu often begins a series by drawing cuts of the world, basically like concept art. Apparently, he learned about making an image board at a Pixar exhibition and that worked for him. The idea for Dandadan only came around when Yukinobu couldn't draw manga anymore. He talked with his editor and they were pretty frustrated. Yukinobu couldn't get any serializations to work out and he was hitting some writer's block. But then his editor said to just draw freely without thinking. That was when Dandadan was born. All Yukinobu had to do was draw a story from the title, and as the title would suggest, the story is about a guy that loses his balls and has to get them back. Yes, very obvious. How can you not tell? Well, actually, before Yukinobu Tatsu started drawing the first chapter, he came up with loglines, which are these one-sentence descriptions of pieces of media. An example is this. A rat who can cook makes an unusual alliance with a young kitchen worker at a famous Paris restaurant. Can you guess what movie it's about? That's right, Ratatouille, the acclaimed 2007 movie directed by the famous Michel Gabriel. For Yukinobu Tatsu, he settled on the simple concept of Sadako versus Kayako. That's how he ended up with the manga's occult themes. From there, Yukinobu's editor knew that Dandadan would be a smash hit. It's interesting to note here though that Yukinobu Tatsu drew the first chapter in a completely free-flow fashion, but he spent more time properly planning the plot later on. Wow, that was some really nice alliteration actually. Of course, there's still a bunch of random-ass things like Okarun losing his balls, which the editor pitched while they were out drinking. Speaking of random-ass plots, I think it's time to actually talk about Dandadan. To give a quick summary of the first chapter, there's this dude named Okarun who believes in aliens but doesn't believe in ghosts. Then there's this girl named Ayase who believes in ghosts but not in aliens. They get into a bit of an argument and make a bet with each other. Okarun sends Ayase to a UFO hotspot and Ayase sends Okarun to a haunted tunnel. For a moment they think nothing bad will happen to either of them, but a ghost granny suddenly shows up in front of Okarun. Simultaneously, aliens kidnap Ayase. From there they get into a crazy fight and by the end of it all, Okarun loses his balls, so they go on a quest to retrieve them. Yeah, No Nut November is quite literal for him. So Dandadan is a little wacky, a little quirky I might even say. The absurdity of this manga really reminds me of stuff like JoJo and Baki where crazy shit just kinda happens. As for JoJo and Baki, their stories are mainly about buff people beating the hell out of each other, but Dandadan, as I mentioned earlier, is really a coming-of-age story as a group of high schoolers deal with insane world-ending problems. You know, problems like horny aliens. For a lot of manga, they try to have it all. Action, comedy, romance, adventure, and even a little bit of horror, but it's rare to see someone cook something that doesn't turn into a complete mess when putting all these ingredients together. Another thing with manga is that they tend to get slowly worse and worse over time. Sometimes they end up dragging their feet with horrible pacing, or they end up having terrible arcs, but Dandadan just keeps getting better and better. New characters are introduced with each arc and they are always as memorable as the last. Other than the two main characters who were introduced in the first chapter, we even got a girl who fights with acrobatics and prehensile hair. Wait, that sounds familiar. We got the guy who enters another form when he's splashed with cold water and can only turn back when he's splashed with hot water. Wait, that also sounds familiar. Well, we've got a hot grandma, a lucky cat, and a short-haired shy girl that pilots mechs. It's quite a star-studded cast, I might say. Of course, my favorite will always be my boy, Peeny Weeny. On the surface, Dandadan might seem like mindless shonen action, but we do get those quiet, introspective moments when we get to see the characters really develop. We get seemingly mundane problems like Ayase getting jealous when Okarun is hanging out with another girl. Ayase has to ask herself whether or not she likes Okarun. She initially denies it, but deep down she really cares about him. As for Okarun, he lacks self-esteem lost steam, not believing anybody could like him, but it's heartwarming seeing him gradually open up to the friends he made along the way. Some of the other main characters are introduced to be seemingly assholes, but as we get more of their backstory, they turn into regular people dealing with their own problems. Yeah, the manga has some really well done slice of life moments, but then we get some insane scenes like the ghosts of classical composers coming back to attack the main characters. It was pretty cool seeing my boys Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, Schubert, and whoever the hell this guy is. This dichotomy between the insane and the everyday life is what makes the series feel closer to a wholesome rom-com at its core despite all the battles. When you get down to the nitty-gritty, Dandadan is about seeing the characters grow rather than having to save the world against the monster of the week. It's not the most polished story because it has so many random events, but that's kind of what life is like. A whole bunch of random things that sometimes end up feeling overwhelming, like you've lost all control. You're stuck in this chaotic battle that doesn't seem to end. Sometimes it takes that one homie to pull you back to reality to let you know that at least they're glad you're safe. So far, as of recording, 128 banger chapters have been released, all on Jump Plus. There have been quite a lot of arcs, but it actually feels like the main cast is still growing. On top of that, there's constantly more lore getting added about the world. In fact, we get a whole flashback about Bamara and how she was by war. There's even a cool detail where an alien borrows a cow from Earth because their blood is the same as milk, and this alien needs that milk to perform blood transfusions for his sick son. It was pretty sad seeing this alien having to work as a mercenary to afford his son's medical costs. But you know what isn't sad? The fact that you, yes, you right there, will read Dandadan right after this video ends. Yup, welcome to the Danda gang.